Hi, I'm Attorney Layug. I'm a senior partner at Divina Law, and I'm the president of the Developers of Renewable Energy for Advancement. And you're tuned in to Power Podcast.
Welcome to Power Podcast, where we do an in-depth discussion on all issues relevant to the Philippines energy sector with some of the most quotable newsmakers and important decision makers in the industry. Power Podcast is a production of Power Philippines, the only online publication in the country dedicated to covering energy development across the archipelago. We cover all news and issues that spark meaningful conversations among members of our growing online community. Like them, we believe that sustaining the growth of the energy sector is vital to the growth of the country itself. I'm your host, Nika Roque, and let's get on with the show. Hi everyone, whether you're listening live or replaying this podcast, thank you for joining us in the newest episode of our podcast. I am Nika Roque, your host for this episode. The country is pushing for a more aggressive goal in the share of renewable energy in the generation mix under the revised Philippine Energy Plan. With that, the country has issued several policies, including the opening of renewable energy projects to 100% foreign ownership and higher renewable portfolio standards or RPS requirements. This is in order to meet the goal of 35% in 2030 and 50% in 2040. But how can such policies help in further expanding the country's renewable energy portfolio? Here with us today is one of the biggest names in the energy industry, a former Department of Energy Undersecretary, and is now a senior partner at Divina Law, and the president of the Developers of Renewable Energy for Advancement, Atty. Layug. Welcome to Power Podcast, Atty. J. Thank you for joining us in this episode.
Thank you, Nika. Good morning. And of course, to all your followers, good morning, everyone, to Power Podcast.
We're going to do a lot of lawyering today, Atty. J, and I am sure that the Power Philippines community is excited to hear your thoughts and opinions on the various aspects of the industry. So, to give us a starting point, Attorney, can you share with us where renewable energy stands in the country? Is it improving or is coal still the dominant resource that we have?
You know, Nika, that's a very good question. 10 years ago, when I served in government, you will see that in terms of actual generation for renewable energy, we reached almost as high as about 34%. However, after 10 years, and despite all those rules that we tried to implement, right now, if you look at the data of the Department of Energy, our generation for renewables went the opposite way. We're down to 20%, and that's a sad state of affairs. And we're hoping to reverse that. And we're so excited with the Marcos administration because they've taken a very aggressive and proactive stance in ensuring that this time we go for renewables and enough with the fossil fuels. Very excited, although we went the opposite way. But with the new administration, with the new DOE secretary and ERC chairperson, we're very, very hopeful and excited, actually.
You mentioned, Attorney, that the Marcos administration has done things differently. So, what has this admin done differently versus the previous administration? Because I remember in one of our events when we met back then, you commended the Marcos administration for pushing renewable energy sources.
Actually, Nika, in the previous administration, I've been pushing for a lot of reforms and a lot of amendments in the rules of the DOE. It took them 6 years and unfortunately nothing happened. And when DOE Secretary Popo Lotilla, who's my law professor as well in UP, took the helm at the DOE, in 3 months, he issued the rules that I've been requesting. Immediately, you saw, and we all saw the impact of the DOJ opinion, allowing foreign investors in the renewable energy space. And then you also saw the immediate increase in the RPS. From 1%, it's now up to 2.52%. That means a lot of our electric cooperatives and DUs, get more supply from renewables. What else? Immediately, now all renewables are considered preferential dispatch, something we struggled in the previous administration. So many things changed, and then you have all these very aggressive green energy auction targets. We're very, very excited, and we hope it continues because this government is walking the talk. It's not just promising, it is doing what is needed to be done.
So going outside RE a little bit, the country is moving towards cleaner energy. And with that, LNG is considered as what they call transition fuel. Some say that this is a threat to the shift to renewable energy. What's your take on this, Attorney?
Not at all a threat. It's correct. LNG would be your transition fuel. Of course, the challenge for all of us, again, would be cost, no? The price. Unfortunately and sadly, we did not find any new reserves after Malampaya. And so now we need to replace Malampaya with imported LNG. So again, this is where we will be very vulnerable to the international market price, just like in oil. But certainly we need baseload, right? And we have seen last year how coal has increased, to unprecedented levels. Everyone's having a hard time, especially our industrial customers, because once upon a time, coal was at 3 pesos 50 centavos per kilowatt hour. No? Last year, it went as high as 11 pesos. So we're hoping, and that's what we've been saying in the past administration, please reverse this trend of relying on coal, because we need to make sure that we rely more on renewables, and we have an abundance of that. I always explain whenever I'm in a lot of energy conferences, we have a lot of renewables. Just remember one word, big show. Biomass, geothermal, solar, hydro, ocean, and wind. Now, name it, we have it. So we have to tap more of these resources.
President Marcos Jr.'s recent SONA, he mentioned that one of the targets of this administration is to achieve 100% electrification before his term ends. Do you think that's something possible to do?
Nika, as long as you have will, political will, it's always possible. And I think so far this administration has shown that. Case in point, we've been shooting for offshore wind this time, right? Government's very loud in pursuing offshore wind because of the scale. One offshore wind project would be around 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts. So you can see left and right, the government pushing really hard on the investors. And in the infrastructure space, you will see also that the government is looking at the Philippine ports and also transmission line to upgrade them, to make sure that these offshore wind projects will go online. So again, as I've said, we've never seen this political will before. So we're very excited, and the private sector certainly will be very cooperative and collaborative with the government.
President Marcos also mentioned the unified national grid in one of his sonas. Do you think, Attorney Jay, it is the only way to enable competitive prices across the country? And what other solutions are available?
That's a very difficult question. What I did, Nika, was to check other jurisdictions. What do they face in terms of transmission line infrastructure? Our experience in the Philippines is no different from other countries. Now, if you look at Australia as an example and UK, it will take them at least 7 to 10 years to upgrade their transmission lines to accommodate more renewables in the system. So what NGCP is going through is nothing different. It really takes a lot of time to upgrade all these systems. And it's not a solitary problem. When you try to put up new lines, you have right-of-way issues, right? You have to buy land from private sector. That takes a lot of time. And then, of course, in the past, not under this administration, but in the past, you've had regulatory issues. The approval for the budget for NGCP takes quite some time. And then all the approvals, for example, for point-to-point transmission lines at the ERC, it also takes a lot of time. So we need to improve the government processes. And at the end of the day, as long as we help NGCP do its job. And of course, a lot of push from the DOE, which we are now seeing. I'm pretty sure we can all work together and make sure that all these transmission facilities are upgraded very soon and very quickly. Because at the end of the day, especially from the private sector, we want to make sure that the government and the private sector are working hand in hand together.
So, Attorney Jay, kung 7 to 10 yung first world country, it would take them 7 to 10 years to incorporate RE into their national grid. Sa tingin niyo po, gano'ng katagal naman dito sa Pilipinas? Just a ballpark idea.
Well, alam mo, Nika, if the planets align, meaning the government works together with the private sector, right-of-way issues, approvals of permits, I think we can do it in about 5 to 6 years.
So mas mabilis po kesa sa...
Mas mabilis because the scale that we're trying to put up anyways, not near where the other countries are. Again, the challenge always for the private sector is the regulatory part. As you know, Nika, you've heard this, 200 permits just to put up a power plant. But kudos to the government, particularly Senator Win Gatchalian, who passed the EVOS law, the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop. It's an online platform. But of course, it's only a few government agencies in EVOS now. So we have to have everybody in the same platform para mapabilis yung mga permits and licenses. No? Kaya natin. It's been done before. No? I've seen that during the time of DOE Secretary Reyes, when he wanted all permits to be issued for exploration of natural gas in the Sulu Sea. He did it in 1 week.
Wow.
He gathered all agencies in one room and said, process now the permit. So we can do it. And besides, Nika, we have supply issues. Malampaya's dwindled, and we need to build more power plants to fill up the gap.
Thank you, Atty. So now let's go over the recently concluded Green Energy Auction Program. So the DOE generated 3,580 megawatts from the second round of the JAP. It is only 30% of their target. So what is your take, Atty. J, on this low turnout, and what do you think needs to be done by the DOE in order to address?
You know, Nika, I don't necessarily view the turnout as a failure. It was 30% because in the first place, the target is really high.
It's 11 gigawatts.
11 gigawatts. Nowhere in the universe, Nika. No? But to me, it's a good signal. Because number one, the government is already telling the entire universe, we need renewables. No? 11 gigawatts at that. No? Number two, 3,500 megawatts of new power plants in the next 3 years. That's a lot. If you look at the history of renewables in the last 10 years, 2,500. And yet, in this new administration, they can already put up 3,500 megawatts in 3 years. So to me, that's a good sign. I just hope that it continues. The government anyway said they will do this auction every year. But to me, it's not necessarily a failure. Of course, there's still room for improvement. A lot of our players have asked questions about transmission line availability. A lot of the investors also have requested that maybe our performance bond is too high. It's at 30% of the project cost, no? And other administrative issues. No? But kudos to the DOE, from the first auction to the second auction, they've already improved the process. Ang laki ng difference. That's why we've been commending government. They've been listening to the private sector. Of course, the biggest question, Nika, is the gear price. I think we need to improve the model. And if we can offer a much better price, I think we can fill up that 11 gigawatts next year.
So if there's one lesson for everyone in this in the second round of JAP, including private sector, the government, anong lesson yun, Atty. J?
Well, in terms of the factors to make sure we can improve this, two factors to me important. No? One, the gear price. And number two, transmission line infrastructure and assurance. If the DOE can assure that if there's any delay in transmission line upgrade can be considered force majeure, then that gives the investor comfort in participating. Because paano kung hindi matapos yung linya? No? It's not their fault, right? It will give the investor comfort kung sabihin ng government, don't worry, force majeure naman yan. That's one. The gear price, again, no? I'm seeing room for improvement. One of the requests of the investors, no, Nika, is maybe let's index the price to CPI and foreign exchange. Kasi ngayon, fixed price for 20 years. And you have heard a lot of the investors worry about the risk, especially of foreign exchange. There's a balance. And I think even at indexed price, I think that will invite more investors to participate.
So, renewable energy players early opined that new technologies will shape the next round of the JAP. So, what's your take on this, attorney? And what do you think what kind of technologies, rather, do you think should be included in the next round?
Definitely, emerging technologies will be a big factor. I can see three. No? One, offshore wind. Talagang offshore wind is, ever since the World Bank report, for the DOE no, in 2021, 2022, of which I was a part, talagang you had a deluge of foreign offshore wind players. We now have 60 service contracts for offshore wind. Imagine that. For 72 gigawatts. Ang dami. What else? Floating solar. That's another emerging technology. And we're talking about floating solar in the sea, in open sea. Kasi ang mahal na ng lupa in the Philippines. Ang hirap maghanap. That's why the government is now looking more in other places like open sea.
Yes, sir. Naalala ko lang, attorney, yung sa Laguna de Bay, I think there are plans na parang maglagay ng floating solar doon. So is that something okay for you?
Definitely. It's away from from land mass, and then the scale can be bigger. Of course, subject to ECC requirements, no, and making sure that your fisheries and marine resources are protected. That would help us a lot. Remember, Malampaya is about 3,500 megawatts, Nika. No? We need to replace that. Anong papalit natin? But if we have offshore wind and floating solar, easily they can put up those numbers in capacity.
You mentioned offshore wind, attorney. So, naku-curious lang ako, saan parts ng Pilipinas kaya applicable yung offshore wind? Kasi may maalon, may mahinang hangin na lugar dito sa bansa natin.
Yeah. Alam mo, Nika, the good news is the World Bank conducted already a study. And based on the World Bank report, we have 6 development zones. They identify these areas as areas with the best potential for wind. So meron sa north, meron din sa Guimaras area, meron dito sa may Bataan. Even Manila Bay is a good area for offshore wind. So alam na ng ating mga developers where to look at. That's why those are the areas where they applied for service contracts. About 60 already issued by the DOE. Meron din sa north, no? Yung Ilocos area, malakas din ang offshore wind doon.
So hindi lang onshore. Ay, tama, hindi lang land.
Hindi lang sa beach, no? I don't in there, Nika, it's so beautiful, no?
Yeah.
Pero yung offshore part pala, mas malakas pa.
Okay.
Based on data.
Going back, attorney, you mentioned 3, nakakadalawa ka pa lang.
The last one, no? The last one would be your hybrid battery storage with renewables. No? The government is seriously looking at it. And, one of the things we need to be very careful and very calibrated on about is to make sure that as we put more renewables in the system, alam mo naman, renewables intermittent or variable, right? So, solar, nandyan lang during the day. Ang wind sa hapon lang. So, we have to make sure that we're able to balance that off with base load. And the way to do it, is put in the battery storage facilities. So we're very hopeful that the battery storage costs will come down also, just like solar. If you recall, Nika, yung solar fit natin, 9.68 pesos per kilowatt hour way back in 2011. No? Right now, it's down to yung latest gear price mo, 4.6 pesos. So talagang bumababa. On the other hand, ang coal mo, baliktad. 350 before. Now it's up to what? 9 pesos. Na umahal. So that's why I in the last administration, I've been pushing them. Let's add more renewables and not coal. Bumaliktad eh. That's the problem.
The tables have turned, kumbaga, attorney.
The table has turned. No? Now we have, in terms of power generation, RE is down to 20% and coal is up to more than 50%. Baliktad talaga.
So moving on, Attorney Zay. So the government over the last year, as you mentioned earlier, has issued several policies that will help in increasing RE share in the mix. One of those is allowing the 100% foreign-owned companies to develop projects here in the country. So, attorney, for our viewers, can you help us understand how 100% foreign ownership works for RE projects and bakit ito lang yung renewable energy source na allowed na pumasok ang mga foreign investors?
Okay. Let's look at the history of how the 1987 Constitution was read and interpreted both by the DOE and SEC, in fact. If you look at Article 12, Section 2, parang lecture ng law school. Because I teach this in project finance. Yung Article 12, Section 2, nakalagay dyan, all natural resources belong to the state. So ang may-ari niyan, gobyerno. And if you want to explore, develop, utilize these resources, ang sabi doon, kailangan 60-40 Filipino-owned ka. Alright? That was the original interpretation of renewables, it being considered natural resource, and therefore it falls within that 60-40 requirement under the Constitution. However, with the DOJ opinion, sinasabi niya, ang renewables kasi, particularly solar and wind, are considered kinetic energy. So it does not fall within the natural resource classification of the Constitution. No? And therefore, hindi siya papasok doon sa 60-40 requirement. Okay? If you look at fossil fuels, oil, coal, natural gas, 100% foreigners pwede dyan. Pero yung big show mo, biomass, geothermal, solar, hydro, ocean, and wind, 60-40 lang before. But the DOJ opinion now said they can enter into renewables. And therefore, The challenge always for any power plant, Nika, is capital, no? Pondo. And of course, our Filipino businessmen, especially when it comes to technology like power plants, they will not put in so much capital, no? Because the risk is high as well. But with the DOJ opinion, and dahil sanay naman yung mga foreigners natin because they developed the technology, now there has been a lot of foreign companies looking at the Philippines. No? I'm sure di ka napapagod ka na sa dami ng conferences, no? Yung energy conferences. Ang dami-dami, di ba? That in fact, I think is a result of welcoming foreign investors now in the renewable energy business. So really, it's a good sign for us.
So some Filipinos are questioning this 100% foreign ownership. Is this something that our locals should be worried about? Kasi syempre, the competition is there. Baka isipin nila, iniisip ba nila hindi kaya ng renewable energy na local lang yung mga projects?
Alam mo, yung maliliit kaya, no? Small projects, no? Maybe 5, 10 megawatts. Yung malalaki, hindi natin kaya. No? That's why we want these foreign investors to come in. No? For example, offshore wind. Ang offshore wind, 1 gigawatt eh. No? And if you look at the current costing of offshore wind, medyo mahal. No? Maybe $4 billion per megawatt. Hindi natin kaya. No? I don't think a Filipino investor would spend so much equity and put in that equity for that one project. Kaya that's why it's good to welcome these investors. Anyway, madami naman silang pondo, right? Capital. Let them come here, no? And develop these projects. So I'm not fearful for us, Philippines. Kasi at the end of the day, yung hangin ba, yung sinag ng araw, yung tubig ba, makukuha ng foreigners? Hindi naman. It will continue to be there as long as the government continues to issue also the permits. So that's why we have control in that sense.
At saka to add na rin, Atty. J, I think at the end of the day, tayo rin kasi yung makikinabang sa mga projects na ina-invest natin dito.
That's true, no? Because it translates into electricity. No?
That's what we need.
That's what we need badly. No? Alam mo, Nika, if you see the DOE data, every summer for the next 3 years, may problema tayo eh. No? Because our baseload power plants in Malapaya coming down. No? Paano papalit? Yan nga yung problema natin. No? So, hopefully, we add more renewables in the system, especially during summer. No, if you have more solar, yan ang pinakakailangan natin, no? Yung peak demand. Hopefully, we address that shortage. And the DOE is working hard on it.
So, taking on a local perspective naman, Attorney, we have the new renewable portfolio standards which require companies to contract 2.52% of their electricity from renewable energy developers per annum. So, ibig sabihin, every year dapat tataas yun. So, do you think that's enough to help meet the renewable energy goal that we have right now?
That 2.52, when you calculate it, it will meet the 35% by 2030. Okay, so it's good for us. The big question mark really is convincing all these projects to build. Okay, kasi in terms of service contracts, ang dami na nang na-award ng DOE. Hindi problema yung projects. Ang problema, how fast can we keep up, especially with the upgrades of the transmission line. Kasi sige, magtayo tayo ng planta, hindi naman mababato sa linya. So that's always the challenge. So, it's good to increase to 2.52. Alam mo, nung I was the chairman of the National Renewable Energy Board, pahirapan kami pa-approve yung RPS. So, ang agreement noon, 1% na muna, no, sabi sa akin ni Secretary. So, but eventually, with the new secretary, tinaas na niya kaagad. Kailangan talaga tulungan natin yung private sector, no? May tayo yung mga planta. At tulungan ang NGCP ma-upgrade lahat ng linya.
Attorney J, what do you think are the other policies should the country have in order to achieve two things? One, a fair share between conventional and RE, and two, energy security across the archipelago, especially yung mga far-flung areas natin.
Let me start with the far-flung areas. One of the policies we issued in NREV is the RPS for off-grid areas. Okay. Alam mo, Nika, may mga kwento na natanggap ako noon. Pag bagyo, kasi ang source of power ng mga islands natin, diesel, the diesel generators. May nakita pa akong video. So, dinadala yung diesel, yung barrel of diesel, doon sa island. Dahil mabagyo, nalaglag pa. In other words, the supply of diesel, especially during rainy months, no, very difficult. So we're hoping that under the RPS, they will be forced to hybridize. Meaning, no, hindi lang diesel or bunker fuel, ang source of supply nila of power will be renewables. Pwedeng wind, pwedeng biomass, pwedeng solar. So if you hybridize them, mas madaling magkaroon ng kuryente sa mga islands. It will not be hard. Hindi na natin iisipin kasi malayo eh. And again, it's a lesson for the Philippine government. I remember way back in 2012 when I visited an island. Walang kuryente. And we were inaugurating a small hybrid solar diesel genset system. What did I observe in that island, somewhere in Palawan? Two things. Number one, ang daming bata na nagtatakbuhan sa island. Bakit? Ang tanong ko kay barangay captain, bakit ang daming bata? Sir, wala akong kuryente sa gabi. So, anong ginagawa nila ng mga mag-asawa? Nag-aanak. Kasi walang ilaw, walang magawang iba. No? And number two, ang daming aso. Pakalat-kalat. So, tinanong ko rin si barangay captain, bakit ang dami yung aso? Sir, wala rin akong kuryente. Pati mga aso, yun lang ang ginagawa nila. No? So, it's a lesson for me, and I think the government, if we electrify the islands, there'll be more productive activities outside of having more children and dogs. So certainly with the RPS for off-grid islands, we can prevent, overpopulation. Paggabi, if you have light, if you have electricity, they can study or maybe sing karaoke, right? And avoid having more children. That's one. In terms of policies, alam mo, if there's anything good in the Philippines, there are many lawyers. On the one hand, that's good, sometimes bad. But because we have many lawyers, ang galing natin magsulat ng batas at ng policies. Ang pinaka-problem natin, implementation. Mm-hmm. So, that's what I'm hoping. No? But now, again, I'm seeing a lot of political will. No? Tuwan-tuwa ko kami. Even the president himself would inaugurate projects on energy. And he's the one telling all the sector now, he wants the first offshore wind by 2028. A very aggressive timeline, but nonetheless, it's a good signal to all of us.
So before we conclude this episode, Attorney Jay, let's talk about the country's goal in achieving energy security and the updated Philippine Energy Plan. The original target, 35% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. Can the Philippines reach its target RE share on time, especially yung 50% by 2040?
Very doable. With the emerging technologies that we mentioned earlier, floating solar and floating offshore wind, very, very doable. We just need to make sure that we are updated in our transmission line infrastructure. We are also upgraded in the Philippine ports. Alam mo, Nika, hindi mo pwedeng dalhin yung wind turbine kung hindi malaki yung ports eh. Mm-hmm. And that has been, it's not unique to us, no? Lahat naman ng bansa na nag-offshore wind, talagang in-expand yung mga Philippine ports, yung mga ports nila. No? So, very doable. That 50% by 2040, as long as these new technologies are able to build in the Philippines. As I said, offshore wind. Meron na tayong service contracts equaling 72 gigawatts. So, kung kalahati lang nun may tayo, can you imagine, no? More than our peak demand, easily. Of course, cost will be a question there. No? But if government will spend on the ports, will spend also on the transmission line upgrades, there's no doubt about it. No, we can meet our target.
You mentioned the things that the government should do to help achieve the 50% target. How about the private sector, Atty?
Alam mo, private sector will not be a problem. They have the funds, even banks. The banks, our local banks in particular, have been looking for projects. They have a lot of cash to help finance projects. So the private sector has been very cooperative as well with the government through DREAM. And we established DREAM to make sure that it is a constructive umbrella organization. We're not there to fight government. No, we're there to help government. And we have shown that for the past 4 years that we have been very active. So the private sector will be there to cooperate. Of course, you weed out those that are what we consider flippers. Medyo madami-dami din yan, Nika. No? But the government knows naman who they are. But private sector will not be a problem. If at all, pwede tayo magtulungan, no? Both public and private sector. And definitely we can meet our targets with full collaboration.
So last question, Attorney Jen, I'm sure this has been asked to you multiple times na. Can the country run on 100% renewable energy? Why or why not?
Well, I guess I'll use the example of other countries where they have 100% renewables. Can we do it? Yes. The only question is when, right? As I've said, with the emerging technologies, now we are seeing offshore wind and floating solar as projects with bigger scale, right? So we can certainly do it. And once your battery storage facilities cost come down, yun talaga no doubt about it. No? They can be the base load power for us. No? So certainly, we can do it. In a matter of time, alam mo, I remember the Fit for Solar because I was the one that filed that at the ERC 2011. When we were pushing for Fit for Solar, I remember my good friend, no, the REMB director, Manong Fort Sibayan, told us the Fit for Solar someday will be 450. At the time we filed the ERC, at the ERC, na-shock kami kay Manong Fort. We did not believe him. But look where we are now on the cost of solar. It even went down to as low as 350. Okay, so we can do it, certainly, over time. And I'm excited for the Philippines because unlike our Asian neighbors, ang dami nating renewables. We are now the third largest producer of geothermal, once upon a time second. And we still have untapped geothermal reserves. We have a lot of biomass. Nako, Nika, one of the more hot topics now is municipal solid waste. Sa dami ng basura natin, we can certainly put up a lot of biomass plants, waste-to-energy plants. We have a lot of solar. No, we have a lot of hydro. Ocean. Ocean is another technology that hopefully soon its cost will come down so we can tap more. And of course, wind, no? Not just onshore, now we have offshore wind as well. So madami, and I think it's just a question of time that someday we will be 100% renewable.
And may mga gusto pa akong itanong, Attorney Jay, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So before we end, can we have any final thoughts from you, sir?
Well, I've always said this a long time ago when we put up DREAM, no? One phrase I always use is keep the faith. You will notice that DREAM was coined as such because it was so hard before for renewables. It was a dream. Now that we are where we are and the planets have aligned, cost of coal and oil are going up. And then you have the government right now that is fully supportive. Again, kudos also to the DOE. No? Not only very supportive, its current roster of officials are very competent and they have no other agenda but to make sure that we have more supply. With where we are now, I'm very sure that we are going to have more renewables in the system. And, as an overall agenda, of course, it is for the future of our children. No? I know it sounds cliche, but actually, we're doing this really for the future generation. Someday, you and I will not be here, and they will be enjoying a cleaner environment because we have pushed for renewables.
And on that note, maraming salamat po sa inyo, Dream President and former DOE Undersecretary, Attorney Jay Layug, for joining us. We hope to see you again in our future episodes.
Thank you, Nika, and thank you to all your viewers.
And that wraps up today's Power Podcast. Tune in next time as we converse with the movers and shakers of the country's energy sector. For your comments and suggestions, you may message us through Power Philippines Facebook Messenger account or email us at news.powerph@gmail.com. And of course, be updated on the country's energy sector by visiting powerphilippines.com and by liking us on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you want to view this podcast again, check out our YouTube channel at Power Philippines News. I am Nika Roque and have a powerful day ahead.